Israel claims it's targeting armed Hezbollah militants, part of the Iranian proxy forces there. And we've also seen Israel overnight target Syrian army posts close to the border, which has been condemned by many Arab countries. So clearly Israel is ploughing on, but Benjamin Netanyahu is choosing his words carefully. He is clearly having to follow Donald Trump's lead to a point, but his specific goals in regards to this war clearly vary from America's.
Yeah, and there has been disagreement between them. Donald Trump criticised Benjamin Netanyahu the other day. So what's the relationship like between the two of them?
It's hard to tell, isn't it? I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu gave a press conference yesterday. In Hebrew, he said the war will last for as long as it takes. This is a military operation he has been wanting to undertake for years. It's part of his political mission as he sees it. But he also said in English in the same press conference that the war might not last for as long as people think. You are not hearing either the US or Israel talk about regime change in Iran. They're sort of giving the same message, saying it is up for the Iranian people to rise up and topple the government if they wish. I'm sure Israel would like the leadership to be toppled in Iran, but as of now the official goals seem to be the depletion of Iran's ability to manufacture missiles as well as its nuclear program. But I think what is becoming an issue, increasing issue, especially for America, is the question of the Strait of Hormuz, where before this war 20% of the world's oil passed through it. It is something America is being forced to address and deploy more resources towards trying to free up. That will be far from simple. As far as Israel is concerned, it seems content in continuing to degrade Iran's military capability.
I watched that press conference that Benjamin Netanyahu held that you referred to. It was quite notable, the difference between what he said in Hebrew and the tone, and how he then reiterated a rather different message, as you point out, in English. So how much support does he have within Israel for what he's doing?
Well, there are very few dissenting voices politically. There are only a handful of opposition MPs who are criticising Israel's strategy here, certainly in terms of to the north with its incursion into Lebanon, where the Israelis are setting up what they call a buffer zone. Effectively, they are grabbing Lebanese territory and engaging with Hezbollah militants there. But broadly speaking, there is still support for Israel in prosecuting this war against a threat that has been widely perceived for much of Israel's history. So in that sense there is support, but you know, these air raid sirens, these missiles, that enduring threat, they do have an effect on people's day-to-day lives. But I think what Israel has is America's military backing, but also America's political cover. Donald Trump is pursuing his own goals. He's been criticised for being convinced by Israel, something Benjamin Netanyahu denied. But you're right, it was interesting. Who was he speaking to? You imagine he was speaking to a domestic audience in Hebrew, but he was also in English saying to his US ally, I'm happy to follow your lead on this. But clearly they are going after slightly different things in this war that is now 3 weeks old.
James, for the moment, thank you very much. James Waterhouse in Jerusalem. Well, joining us now is our political correspondent Jack Fenwick, and as we were reporting yesterday, Sir Keir Starmer agreed to the use of UK bases in the Middle East for the US to use. What are the political implications then for the Prime Minister?
The point that Downing Street are trying to make is that they say the UK government's principle around all this hasn't changed. We know that the UK has already allowed the US forces to use British bases for what they describe as defensive operations. They claim that hasn't changed. They say that the US forces targeting Iranian sites that are striking ships in the Strait of Hormuz is about collective self-defense. They say it counts as those defensive operations. Now, other political parties have said that they're not quite so sure about that. The Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, has described it as the mother of all U-turns. Both the Liberal Democrats and the Green Party have expressed concern at what they see as an escalation and the UK becoming further involved in this conflict. Now, they and some Labour MPs as well are calling for a vote in Parliament on the exact nature of that UK-US agreement about the use of British bases. It feels unlikely that we'll get to that point to me.
There is an emergency meeting to be held next week. What's the focus of that?
There is. So I think the thing at the top of the Prime Minister's mind right now is likely to be the implications of all of this on the cost of living at home. There will be a meeting of the COBRA committee. That's the committee that convenes to discuss the response to emergencies and disasters. We can expect the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, the Energy Secretary, other senior ministers to be at this meeting. There's an immediate question around the price of petrol and diesel. The RAC say that they expect those prices to go up in the next few days. There is also big concern in government about what happens to household bills after July when the energy price cap, which has been supporting people, runs out. Ministers have been thinking about what support they may be able to give, how generous that might be able to be, although no doubt they will remember that when the government stepped in and supported people when Russia invaded Ukraine, the bill ended up being eye-watering, and I doubt ministers will want to get into a similar situation there. The other person present at this emergency meeting will be the Governor of the Bank of England. Now, we know that he has been talking pretty regularly to the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, in recent days. There have been fears that economic shocks could have an effect on interest rates. That, in turn, could then affect mortgages. There's been talk of some banks withdrawing mortgage deals in the past few days. I think it's likely that will be discussed too.
Jack, for the moment, thank you very much, Jack Fenwick.
How do we solve our nation's biggest challenges? Precision, speed, honor. No manual, no roadmap, no problem. Launching AI in orbit, using XR on the battlefield, stopping fentanyl at the border, making America stronger, safer, faster. It's who we are and how we lead. Blues out. It's in our code.
Why sell your car at WeBuyAnyCar.com? Because selling it yourself means dealing with...
Okay, I'll give you half now. Okay, and this. This is mine.
Don't suffer selling your car on your own. Visit WeBuyAnyCar.com to see what your car's worth. We make it easy. Get in, get out, and get paid at a fair price.
Nice.
Get your free online valuation now at...
The US military says it has struck some 7,000 targets since the start of this war with Iran. But how do you find, identify, and eliminate that many targets? And what role is artificial intelligence play in that process?
The military call
You
it
don't
the
want to
kill
make
chain,
it
the
easier for
targeting
her.
sequence in which artificial intelligence is now deeply embedded. And we'll talk to someone who up until last year was on the inside advising the US military on precision warfare.
We'll look at the tension that is creating between the Pentagon and the companies that develop the artificial intelligence. Stay with us. This is the Security Brief.
Anyway,
Mikey, walk us through the kill chain. How does it actually work, and where does AI fit within it?
Yeah, so it is called the kill chain. It's quite a coarse term, but it's actually what's used in military parlance, and it's a term that is used to describe the entire targeting sequence. So from the first piece of intelligence that identifies a potential target, to the moment the precision-guided munition hits, to then the assessment of how that munition has affected the target. That's called bomb damage assessment. The acronym that is used in military parlance is quite long, but if we use a graphic here to explain it, it's called F2T2EA, and hopefully it'll spell it out now. So find, fix, target, track, engage, assess. And the point today is that artificial intelligence is accelerating every stage of this process.
Okay, well, let's start at the beginning of that sequence, finding the target. What intelligence is being fed into that find process?
Yeah, so there's we talk about this a lot on the security brief. There's three main key pieces of intelligence. The first one we talk about is human or human intelligence. And that's from assets or informants, potentially on the ground. Then there's imagery intelligence. This is the second key one, IMINT, as we call it. And it's predominantly from drones, but it could be from GEOINT, from satellites as well. Let's take a look at an example of how the US would have been getting imagery intelligence over Iran. We've seen, or I've seen on open source intelligence networks, video footage of this is the MQ-9 Reaper. This has been used pervasively over Iran. Now, it also transpires that open source intelligence is saying that 11 of these have actually been shot down. But there are more advanced drones, Christian, as well, like the stealth RQ-170s that we saw operating or coming back from operating over Venezuela during the Maduro operation.
And what about electronic intelligence?
Yeah, the third component. ELINT, as it's called, and this is a critical subset. A critical subset of ELINT is what's called signals intelligence. And last week we focused on the RC-135. We can see it here now. It's basically the same airframe as the KC-135. Those two that had the collision that we spoke about earlier on. It's a reconnaissance aircraft, basically, that was deployed to Al Udeid earlier on in the build-up, and it's basically there to intercept communications. So it's phone calls, radio traffic, command signals, etc.
Okay, so that's an awful lot of information coming from various different directions. And AI is playing a role in all of that.
Yeah, I mean, across all of those three, the data is significant. And this has always been one of the problems, is that the ability to collect the data has accelerated significantly, but when there's a human involved, the ability to analyze and process that data has always been the bottleneck. So now what AI is doing is it's automatically detecting and classifying military assets, it's labeling them, and we're talking about thousands of satellite passes, hundreds of hours of drone footage, intercepted communications, all of it arriving simultaneously. A human analysis might be able to process a handful of that information, but the collation of intelligence has, as I said, accelerated with drones. When the capability of drones came on the market, that just started to suck up way more intelligence, and the ability to analyze that didn't keep up. So now AI can cross-reference those millions of data points in literally seconds.
Right, so we know that Anthropic's Claude was embedded in the Pentagon systems and was used to great effect in the Maduro raid. But then just days before the war started, the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, ordered it to be stripped out. Do we know whether Claude is being used in Iran to identify and track those 7,000 targets?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, without a shadow of a doubt, the answer is always yes. Phased it out on the 28th, and then the bomb started falling the same day. And our colleagues at CBS, as we know, have confirmed that Claude was used in those initial strikes and is still being used. And the reason for that is simple. Claude is effectively the backbone of Palantir's Maven targeting system, the platform running inside the kill chain. You can't rip that out overnight. It's impossible. And right now, the Pentagon doesn't have a replacement or an alternative that can back it up.
Okay, so we've got this Palantir presentation of what Maven does, and also how it orders the target list.
Yeah, so what we'll do now is we'll take a quick look of Palantir's own demonstration. But what I want you and what I want the viewer to watch is just how quickly it moves from that raw intelligence across the three components, human, IMIN, and ELIN, to then identify, we talk about this a lot, the COA, the course of action. This is the system that Claude has at its core.
As you can see, it's not just one data feed, it's multiple. And instead of having 8 or 9 systems for those decision makers to look at every single day, in order for them to make decisions, you then fuse it into a single visualization tool. You have different types of targets that are identified on the left there. Every single column produces a different type of decision-making process. Once you have that decision and you're trying to actually action that process, we now move into COA generation, course of action generation, where we are automatically, via a number of factors, trying to identify what the best asset to prosecute a target looks like. Once we've got the different approaches and we select one, we then can move directly into how do we action that target. So we've gone from identifying the target to now coming up with a course of action to now actioning that target. all from one system. This is revolutionary. We were having this done in about 8 or 9 systems where humans were literally moving detections left and right in order to get to our desired end state, in this case, actually closing a kill chain.
Christian, I've got to say, having worked in this process over 20 years ago, to watch that on the screen and the level of technology that we're now looking at, I think I've probably got your attention now.
Well, I mean, that's an eye-opener, I think, for our audience, because that's targets on spreadsheets, multiple kill chains, operating all at once, simultaneously, to hit, as we've seen in this war, thousands of targets within the space of 3 weeks. That's incredible. It tells you, look, it's not the first AI war, but I think what is perhaps new, and that video there just gives us insight into it, is the speed with which it's being done. Let's go back for a second to the kill chain, F2T2EA. We've covered find, intelligence gathered, target identified. What comes next?
Yeah, the second part of that's called fix. It's where you pin the target down precisely, where it tells you something it is there. And fix tells you exactly where it is, and in real time, and it gives you a really accurate GPS coordinate, accurate enough to guide a precision-guided munition onto it. And what AI is doing is it's compressing what used to take hours of that cross-referencing into literally seconds.
And presumably that sort of precision matters, because the next stage is track, which presumably gets more complicated when and if a target moves.
Yeah, I mean, the relativity of a stationary target, it's quite straightforward. A bunker, a command facility, a missile battery, they're all kind of fixed positions. So this is an S-300 missile defense system, but you can see that it's wheeled, so it's mobile. Basically it's on transporter, and we can see some of the footage of Iranian mobile command centers being hit by the US and Israel. And then on the top of that, it's also can assist with the tracking of senior military commanders, high value targets, HVTs as we call them in the military, and they're traveling by road. In the military, we call this what's called a TST, a time-sensitive target. And what AI does, it doesn't just track the target, it predicts where it's actually going next.
Every day, millions of boxes are delivered. Some can't get there soon enough. Boxes full of hope and so much more. Children are waiting and wishing. Learn more at unicefusa.org.
Every IT leader knows this view. A mountain of complexity standing between you and your goals. Disconnected tools, hidden risks, a tangled route that stalls your progress. But every peak has a path, a way to clear the noise and see the route forward. This is the era of intelligent, secure IT, unifying identity, access, and devices, so you can stop fighting the mountain and start leading the ascent. Your path starts here.
Does it? That's right.
Okay, so you've just explained the targeting stage, and this is where, of course, the process gets morally complex, because this is where the collateral damage assessment is made, and that's an important part of the equation. It has to be.
Yeah, this is what I would regard as the most consequential part of the entire chain. And to give you an example, the British military would always conduct collateral damage estimates, called a CDE, for any targeting operation. So what we do is, we look at AI maps of everything that is surrounding the area. That could be a hospital, a school, a religious site, residential buildings. And the AI will calculate what's called a likely blast radius using different weapon methodologies. And then the model would calculate probable casualties or collateral off the back of that. And in theory, that information should determine whether to strike the target and what weapon you're going to use to strike that target.
In theory?
Yeah, so in theory. So just because you have the ability and the means to strike a target, the senior commander must decide whether you should strike that target, and that's where rules of engagement.
And what about having eyes on the target? Because this is all AI and it's all on a spreadsheet, as we just seen. But what about the human connection with what the computer is doing?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we call it pattern of life, monitoring pattern of life, or POL, as it's known. And what you're doing effectively is you're monitoring the surroundings of a target over a period of time. That's why drones are so good for this, because they've got long lighter times. And what you're trying to do is identify any transitionary information that could lead to potential collateral.
In essence, really, the AI should cover up the human mistakes. It should be able to spot where there is a flaw in the system.
Yeah, so if your target has a school bus, for example, that comes by at 8 a.m. every morning, then through that POL and the AI should pick that up. Or if there are kids that go out and play football at certain times of day near the target, for example, that's what POL should pick up. There are other elements that complicate assessment of targeteers. And I spoke to a source that was a targeteer inside NATO, and he was telling me about a weapons malfunction, for example, or a secondary explosion, secondary effects as they're called, and that could be an improvised explosive device, something that you might not know about, that you will be building a collateral damage estimate around that could impede the assessment of that CDE. So there is risk with collateral damage assessments.
Which brings us to the school in Minab province in Iran, the biggest civilian catastrophe of this war, 175 people killed that we know of, and most of them schoolgirls. What went wrong?
The investigation is ongoing, so we are hoping that that will be transparent and that will come out in the course of time. But the Pentagon's own preliminary investigation concluded that the US was likely responsible. The strike was targeting a neighboring IRGC, Naval Base Iranian Forces, but early indications are the coordinates used were out of date. This is an image from BBC's Verify, and you can see in the top right-hand corner of that image the proximity of the school to the base. This is a bomb damage assessment, so on that you can see buildings with visible impact and scorch marks. They're the sort of 5 circles running across the screen, and then you've got likely scorch marks, which comes from the collateral, and then the white square in the sort of top left of the image is buildings that were actually destroyed.
Right, but we know that by December 2025, 2 months before the war, the satellite imagery showed children playing in that courtyard.
Yeah, and I think this is where I hope the investigation will focus, and this is where the questions in hopefully hearings that will come subsequently will focus on. Again, the targeteer that I was speaking to today, he also offered a really interesting piece of information, and that within NATO's gold standard is that no imagery older than 90 days can be used inside the targeting process. Now, in that case, the school has clearly been there longer than 90 days, so the question is, was pattern of life being conducted?
Well, let's get a view on that. Wes Bryant spent years at the Pentagon in the Civilian Protection Center of Excellence. It's a department that was specifically designed to prevent what happened at the Minab school. Wes, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
We've just taken our audience through the kill chain, so find, fix, track, target, engage, assess. In your experience, where does the human actually enter that AI loop in practice versus what the doctrine or where the doctrine says they should?
I can't say where they're entering now. In the last year, we've seen such a kind of a de-evolution in standards and practices in military use of force in some of these operations over the past year. But the human, I could say prior to that, what the Pentagon and the entire DoD, the entire force were working on, primarily with the integration of, Project Maven, was that humans are in the loop, at every stage. We know at this point, to some degree, at least, that Project Maven and parallel programs are being used all the way in the the detection portion, finding a possible enemy target, locating that target if it's a person or structure or vehicle or equipment, what have you, tracking that target if it happens to be moving, even conducting targeting recommendations, weaponeering, for example, possibly incorporating what we have as our collateral damage analysis software in parallel with these AI softwares. I'm not sure how far along at this point they are with that. I don't think very far along, frankly. So it's likely still 2 separate softwares being used along with others. And then the humans should be in the loop at every single point. checking at the very least right after the find. Here's a potential target. Here's a list of potential targets that a human team now needs to verify, whittle that down, and then go to fix and track from there. And AI can assist there.
Pete Hegseth, the Defense Sec, has ordered the stripping of Anthropic's Claude AI from Pentagon systems, yet we know from CBS reporting that Claude is still being used in the targeting sets that have been developed in Iran. So does the removal of that AI make the kill chain safer or more unsafe?
I'm glad you asked. It really depends on how the AI is being used. There are definite benefits to AI integration and targeting, and that's in data aggregation and refinement for human teams. It's also in flagging potential errors. I argue that had we had AI data sets and programming loaded in to flag for civilian populations a pattern of life, no-strike entities, a simply programmed AI system could have pointed out to the targeting team in the case of the Manab school strike that, hey, actually, this is listed as a school on Iranian websites. It's listed in Iranian Google map sources as a school. And also look at the imagery. Very easy to see that it's likely not a military compound with the sports and play areas and the blue and pink walls. And so AI could have easily caught what many humans should have caught all the way along the way in the targeting process here, if used properly.
Wes Bryan, thank you very much indeed for being on the programme. Fascinating stuff, Mikey. Let's pick up some of what Wes was talking about. We've been through now fix, track, target, engage. What we've not talked about a lot is assess. Why is that important?
Well, from a military standpoint, the assess part is called BDA, Bomb Damage Assessment, and it's crucially important because that type of video footage that we're seeing of explosions, it's probably coming from a form of tracking pod that sits under the centre line of the aircraft. It's got electro-optic capability, camera-wise, it's got forward-looking infrared, and the analysts will be poring over that.
In real time?
In real time, yeah, exactly. So as the munition goes in, they'll be recording it. And what the analysts are looking for is, did the munition hit? Did it destroy the target? Collateral damage estimates. And AI analyzes battle damage assessment, as you say, in real time, and it feeds that assessment back into the system, into the target set, either closing the loop or maybe looking at a potential restrike.
Fascinating stuff, Mikey. Thank you very much. That's it for this week. Mikey has done quite a few of these videos on the Iran war, which are there on the YouTube website under the Security Brief catalogue. Do take a look at those. We'll have another episode for you, of course, very soon as we continue to track this conflict and the issues that it throws up. Thanks for watching this week. We'll see you next time.
Want to know well-prepared workdays land right on time? There's Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Remember your dreams, your future, your education? Has private student loan debt destroyed those dreams? It doesn't have to. YRefy refinances distressed or defaulted private student loans that others won't touch. They can save you thousands of dollars, get you a custom payment that you can afford, and they don't care what your credit score is. Don't let private student loan debt ruin your life. Call YRefy today.
It's day 21 of the US-Israel war with Iran. This is our special programme looking at the key developments from today and where things stand after 3 weeks of war. Well, President Trump has stepped up his criticism of NATO allies, describing them as cowards for refusing to help open the Strait of Hormuz. As attacks on oil and gas facilities continue, the head of the world's energy watchdog tells the BBC the war is causing the biggest energy security challenge in history. A blast blows a crater just inside Jerusalem's Old City after a warning of incoming missiles from Iran. Israel hits Tehran with airstrikes as Iranians mark Nowruz, the Persian New Year. Iran's Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei releases a message calling for resistance and national unity. He's yet to appear in public after being named as the successor to his father. And over the coming half hour, we will be live with our correspondents across the region and around the world. And we'll have analysis from our specialists in our London newsroom. And as we take a look at the defining moments of the third week of war and the impact it's having on the world. We will be live in the region shortly, but we begin in the US. Over the last week, President Trump has stepped up his criticism of NATO allies for refusing to help the US secure the Strait of Hormuz. Today, the president described them as cowards and said it would be easy for them to allow ships to safely pass through the strait. Well, our chief North America correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue, is at the White House. Gary, President Trump reiterating today then that the US is doing extremely well in the war, as he said, also lashing out at NATO allies again. What's your assessment of what we've heard from him?
He's pretty angry about the lack of support he's getting from NATO, including the UK, of course, and that's why today's announcement about the use of UK bases is going to be a bit of a victory for this president, albeit a marginal and pretty small one. But he believes that his allies are benefiting, if you like, from the US taking all the risks, not prepared to help him secure the Strait of Hormuz so that oil can get out, and then complaining about the price of oil around the world. And for him, that sounds like NATO not really stepping up. And so you're hearing some pretty strong language. I mean, I don't think he's ever called NATO countries cowards before. That is pretty direct, paper tigers, as he put it. And there was a threat in there. He said the US would remember all this. Now, we don't really know what the plan is for sort of completely opening up the strait. There's a bunch of Marines on the way to the region, a couple of these Marine expeditionary units, one from Okinawa in Japan, and we've learned today from our partners, CBS, that another 2,500 Marines potentially are sailing from the west coast of the United States. Now that'll take them some time to get to the region, but these are two sort of very mobile amphibious units, often used for landing, from beach landings, etc. And there's some speculation, of course, that they could be used either on the coast itself in the straits to try and secure oil passage, or perhaps for Karg Island, which is Iran's major export terminal for its own oil. Now, all those are pretty speculatory things at the moment, because the president said yesterday he wasn't planning sending troops anywhere, but there are all these troops on the way. And a couple of days ago, he said he wasn't afraid of putting boots on the ground. So the message changes day by day on not just the tactics that the president is prepared to use in executing this war, but also on the emphasis about the outcomes, the goals, how it will end, and when it will end.
Gary, for the moment, thank you very much. Gary O'Donoghue at the White House. Well, as the war enters its fourth week, a new wave of Israeli bombardment hit the Iranian capital, Tehran. There has also been an uptick in Iranian rocket attacks on Jerusalem, with debris from a strike hitting the Old City in occupied East Jerusalem. In Iran, at least 3,134 people have been killed, according to a US human rights agency, with more than 3 million people displaced. And across the Gulf, there have been reports of missile and drone attacks. We're joined now by our correspondent Sebastian Usher in Jerusalem and Azadeh Moshiri in Dubai. Sebastian, first to you. There have, as we've said, been more strikes both in Tehran and in Israel. What's the latest on the situation where you are in Jerusalem?
Well, we went a short time ago to where this missile debris fell, just on the edge of the Old City of Jerusalem. This is the first day of Eid, obviously the major Muslim festival. Normally you would have a large amount of people there going to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This year that isn't the case for security reasons. People have been kept away from there. But where this impact site is only about 300 meters away, not just from Al-Aqsa Mosque, but from the Western Wall, obviously sacred to Jewish people and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So this really brought home, I think, to people the fact that the Iranian ability to continue with these strikes, even if they're not causing a large number of deaths or casualties, I mean, there have been, but not on any large scale, and the damage so far has not been that intense, not as intense as I remember last summer during the 12-day war. But this is the first time that I've seen a major kind of impact site. No one was injured, but that impact site right on the edge. And the Israeli authorities essentially have said to Iran, you know, thank you for this gift for Eid. I think this is an own goal for Iran, to be honest. I mean, the idea that they might put at risk with their missiles one of the holiest sites in Islam was something that seemed really, you know, you wouldn't have countenanced it a short time ago. I think people in this area, East Jerusalem, the Old City, felt relatively safe because of those intensely sacred sites being so close, and that Iran wouldn't risk the possibility that one of their missiles or debris from one of those missiles might actually hit them. That is now the case, and we have had in the last 24 hours or so here in Jerusalem a much more intense series of alerts and sirens coming in very quick succession. Now, not a large number of missiles, none of them really except for that one making impact, but all of them keeping alive this sense of a threat that Iran still maintains towards Israel itself.
Sebastian, thank you. As today, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait and Bahrain all reporting drone and missile attacks in the last 24 hours, so no let-up in the Gulf.
Yes, and as countries in this region are marking Eid al-Fitr, and as Iranians all around the world are marking Nowruz, Persian New Year, a long shadow has been cast on those celebrations by 3 weeks of war. And this is exactly the scenario that countries here wanted to avoid, their energy infrastructure being brought in to this war. Now, a day after a group of Arab and Islamic nations warned Iran to halt their attacks and halt them on energy sites as well, there are renewed attacks by Iran reported in Kuwait, for example. That was the latest one. Earlier today, the state oil firm KPC reported that multiple drones had hit an oil refinery there, forcing them to close several units as a precaution. Qatar is still assessing the extensive damage at their LNG field, Ras Laffan, and that is going to have a repercussion on energy markets. It's having a repercussion on their export capacity, which is down 17% over the next 5 years. That's what they feel right now. And so what do? Saudi Arabia is the one that has hinted at military action the most. Though here in the UAE as well, they've talked about reserving their right to respond, but it carries great risk. It could escalate this war further, and it's worth remembering that these countries, they've built all their plans, all their ambitions, their economies on the energy sector, and all of that is now at risk and is having an impact on global energy security around the world.
Azadeh, thank you very much. Sebastian Usher and Azadeh Moshiri, thank you both. Well, those continued strikes in Iran and across the region come as millions of people in the country and around the world are marking Nowruz, the Persian New Year. Iranian state media have published a written message said to be from the Supreme Leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, calling for resistance and unity. Our correspondent Dan Johnson has been speaking to Iranians who've recently crossed into Turkey and asked them how they felt about Nowruz this year.
There is no Nowruz. Many people are mourning because of the day, 2 months before the killing of people. We want people of the world understand my country. Very hard, very.
We can't celebrate Nowruz this year unless we are sure of the fall of the regime and that the families of the fallen can celebrate with us.
But heading the other way and carrying opposing views, we met this family supporting the regime.
America, Israel.
America and Israel should keep their hands off Iran. We just came to Turkey for 3 days. Now we have Nowruz, so we came to buy things and we're going back. Long live Iran forever.
Dan Johnson in Turkey. Let's speak to Siavash Ardalan from the BBC's Persian service, which is used by 24 million people around the world, majority in Iran, despite being blocked and routinely jammed by the Iranian authorities. Siavash, this is the first Nowruz that Iranians have had during wartime since the 1980s. How are people managing to mark Persian New Year today, if at all?
Unlimited play for just $1 a day.
Why pay more for fewer days of fragrance from your plug-in? Switch to Airwick plugins and fragrances. Some plugins only last 50 days per refill, while Airwick refills now deliver fragrance for up to 70 days. For the best value per day, try Airwick.
Yes, as you saw in those clips, some people choose not to celebrate at all, given the conditions, but some people, in fact, find Nowruz and the story of Nowruz a story of resilience. That's why they do want to still keep the tradition alive. And don't forget, Nowruz is a very ancient tradition. It's rooted in thousands of years of history for many Iranians. So even, as you said, despite the fact that even in the 80s, when Iran was engaged in an 8-year war with Iraq, and even today, they still celebrate Nowruz, and we have seen pictures today, just before spring came, in the afternoon, Iranian local time. People were out and about in the streets and the bazaars, not just in the capital, across the country, shopping as they always do before the new year approaches, and trying to make best under the current circumstances. Food is in abundance. You know, the bazaars, the fruit markets are full of fruit and vegetables. The issue is the price, of course, sky-high inflation, making it difficult for people really to celebrate it the way they would want to. But the positive side, the half-full side of the glass, is the fact that not a lot of civilian infrastructure has been damaged. There's water running, there are no electricity shortages, and despite that attack that Israel carried out against Iran's gas field, still people have a good supply of energy, and that doesn't seem to change unless the situation escalates, and that's really what's worrying many Iranians, no matter what they think. On one hand, you have supporters of the regime, you call the hardcore regime loyalists, who are out and about today in the streets, in the cemeteries, remembering those family members who had been killed in this war. And then you have people who are very much opposed to the regime. They're staying put inside their homes and just celebrating it with their family, but with a very somber and gloomy mood.
Siavash, for the moment, thank you very much. Siavash Ardalan from BBC Persian. Well, let's turn to military strategy and the current state of play. One question that's routinely the most searched online is who is winning the war? To try to answer that question, here's the Security Brief's military analyst, Mikey Kay.
To me, the big question is, what is the definition of winning? Is it the removal of the mullahs or regime change? Is it protecting the flow of oil, liquefied natural gas, and fertilizers running through the Hormuz Strait and into the Persian Gulf? Is it about seizing Iranian oil? Is it about annihilation of Iran's ballistic missile program, or preventing Iran from enriching uranium, or some of the above? To me, it's just not clear. Now, there's no doubt that the US and the IDF have conducted, in the early days of Epic Fury, shock and awe operation, but we saw that in the early days of Iraq and Afghanistan, and that turned out to be a very protracted, long war that turned into a quagmire. For me, it's all about the Iranian asymmetric threat. So their Shaheds, their fast attack crafts, their mines, and their ability to be able to reproduce those cost-benefit ratios at mass. And I think ultimately it will depend on the US's ability to be able to counter that and degrade that and destroy that asymmetric threat before we can even start looking at what the term winning actually means.
Mikey Kay of the Security Brief. The UK has approved the use of its bases for the US to launch strikes on Iranian sites targeting the Strait of Hormuz. It comes after the Iranian Foreign Minister told the UK that allowing the US to use its military bases for operations in the Middle East would be considered as participation in aggression. Let's speak to our political correspondent, Damien Grammaticus. Damien, tell us more about this announcement.
Well, this came after a meeting of UK ministers. Now, from the beginning, first 2 days of this war, the UK had allowed the US to use UK bases to fly US aircraft targeting missile sites which were attacking UK interests, UK allies in the region. That now has been expanded to include US aircraft targeting missiles that are attacking shipping in the Strait of Hormuz and associated targets. So let's be clear, this is a broadening of that target list that the UK has allowing the US to carry out. It is not, though, the UK getting involved, as Donald Trump wants, with protecting the Strait of Hormuz. It is not the UK carrying out those attacks itself, but it is certainly a sign that the UK is concerned about those energy flows from the Persian Gulf. Now, opposition politicians here, Conservative Party, already call this a mother of all U-turns. I don't think it goes as far as that. It will concern some worried about UK getting drawn into the war. The Iranians are saying today, warning that it would be seen as facilitating aggression. But the UK government very clearly saying this is about still responding to Iranian attacks on those who were not participating in the original strikes on Iran, Iranian attacks on energy supplies and UK allies. And the UK's preference is for this to de-escalate. That's what the UK government would like to see.
Damien, thank you very much. Damien Grammaticus in Westminster. Well, the war in the Middle East has prompted a surge in gas and oil prices, and today the International Energy Agency told the BBC the world is facing the greatest global energy security challenge in history. Let's speak to our Deputy Economics Editor, Darshini David. Darshini, that warning from the IEA today, they've even urged governments to cut road speed limits by 10 kilometres an hour because of this disruption to fuel supplies. I mean, just how big an impact is this having on the global economy?
Yes, an extraordinary warning, isn't it? Normally in these situations we say that energy producers gain, users lose, but this is not a normal situation by any means, is it? Or any kind of normal upheaval in energy markets, because those producers in the Middle East, as we've seen, literally their products going up in smoke, losing out to the tune of billions of dollars. Standing to gain, on the other hand, the likes of Canada and Norway, they may be the kind of countries that customers look to. They're looking for alternative source of fuels, and of course Russia as well. That could be a big gainer indeed. And those big customers of the energy that goes through the Strait of Hormuz normally, those in Asia, they're the ones who are already having to think about conservation measures, for example 4-day weeks, closing down schools, really disruptive. For the rest of the world and for users across the world, customers, it's really about price, isn't it? And we're already seeing that filter through. And we've heard from central banks in Europe, in the US, and also here in the UK over the last week. Now, they are all conceding that we are likely to see more pressures on inflation. Here, for example, in the UK, they're talking about 3.5% inflation. So what central banks are really stressing here, this is not a return to the kind of inflation we saw a few years ago in 2022, for example. Nevertheless, the expectation is that rate cuts are off the agenda for this year. And those biggest individual users of energy of all, of course, Americans. We may have President Trump saying that America wins when energy prices are high, but in actual fact, it's likely to be a net loser. The other big gas guzzler, of course, is China, we always hear about. But China actually has quite a lot of energy stashed away in reserves, a few months' worth, in fact. So it's relatively insulated on the whole. But make no mistake, the global economy as a whole, as it stands, is set to lose. And what most countries are united in is the speed by which they were caught unawares by this shock. 3 weeks, and they're looking at real challenges to their fortunes, whether they're governments, consumers, or indeed businesses.
Darshini, for the moment, thank you very much, Darshini David. Well, as we enter the 4th week of the US-Israeli war on Iran, questions are continuing to pour in on TikTok and YouTube. One very prominent theme is what happens next. Well, to try to answer that question is our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet. Let's start with that. So many people asking that question. It's really gripped people's attention, hasn't it, this conflict? Where could it go?
it's really important and in some way reassuring that people are asking this question, because we are reminded every day, Martine, that this is a war that affects all of us. The short answer is we just don't know. We hear from President Trump. You heard from Gary O'Donoghue, our Chief North America correspondent, earlier in the program, that President Trump keeps sending conflicting signals. He's trying to reassure the markets, who are very, very nervous, saying, well, it's going to end soon, but then he also talks about keeping on hitting the targets. Yesterday, Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel, he said one message in English, which is the war is going to end soon. In Hebrew, he gave another message, which is the war is still going to go on. And I was just reading a report from our U.S. partner station, CBS News, where they say there are preparations underway for ground forces. And as we've been reporting all this week, there are thousands of Marines and more vessels heading from the Asia-Pacific, heading toward that theater of war. So even as they talk about ending the war soon, they're making preparations for this to go on a long time. And from Iran, no sign at all. Iran continues to try to inflict as high a cost as possible, trying to establish a new kind of deterrence, to say, don't ever think of starting another war again. That you may go after our conventional military abilities, but we are showing you we can still fight back.
How aligned is Israel with the United States?
That is the question. That was the question people asked, Martine, after the Israeli strike on the South Pars natural gas field. A part of it, it's run jointly by Iran and Qatar. It's the world's largest natural gas field. And it was a major escalation in the war. Oil and gas prices immediately spiked. President Trump puts out a post saying, I didn't know anything about this, and saying in capital letters, don't do this anymore, don't attack the oil infrastructure. Prime Minister Netanyahu came out and said, I did it, and I won't do it again. And yet, Martine, there had been all of these articles quoting in Israeli and American media, quoting unnamed American and Israeli officials before and after President Trump's statement, saying the Americans knew about it in advance. So both leaders like to say we are aligned, but sometimes we differ. And in their broad ambitions, there are differences. Prime Minister Netanyahu, in short, has made it absolutely clear from the start, his overall goal is to bring down the regime.
Another question people are asking, particularly on TikTok and YouTube, is this is supposed to be a period of celebration. Nowruz, New Year for people in Iran, Eid as well, people across the region celebrating. I mean, how's that being affected? Just
it doesn't often happen that the Eid al-Fitr, the end of the Muslim month of fasting, aligns with the Persian New Year, which is timed with the spring equinox, so the 20th into the 21st. The most joyous celebration, not just for the people of Iran, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Iraq. Many people around the world follow the Persian calendar, and yet it comes at one of the most painful and perilous time that Iranians can remember.
Very briefly, a statement from the Supreme Leader of Iran, but no sign of him.
A 9-page statement, and still no sign. He hasn't been seen in public, he hasn't been heard in public, but there's been a steady stream of statements, because in all of this, Iran wants to send the message, we're still in charge.
Lise, for the moment, as ever, thank you very much. Lise Doucette, our Chief International Correspondent, thank you. Don't forget there is a live page on the BBC News website and the BBC News app, which is following all of the twists and turns of this conflict between the US, Israel and Iran. Whether you're joining us on YouTube, TikTok, BBC Sounds, radio or television, thank you for your time. We'll be back the same time tomorrow with the Iran War Today.
Really? $200 to be that family? You're better off at Topgolf, where you and your family can have a good time at a fair price. No argument there.
You don't need a dozen brands for your wellness routine. Just one you can trust. Swanson Vitamin has been helping people feel their best since 1969 with over 1,500 products. all third-party tested for purity, potency, and reliability. Swanson gives you thousands of ways to support your health. Backed by scientists, pharmacists, and nutritionists, every product is designed to fit into your wellness routine, all at prices that actually make sense. And with a 100% money-back guarantee, it's all reward, no risk. Click now and start feeling your best, all with just one brand. Try Swanson Vitamins today.
Welcome to the BBC's Global News podcast on YouTube. I'm Andrew Peach. Will Grant is our correspondent in Havana. And Will, this is a big moment for Cuba, isn't it? Under the US oil blockade, there are blackouts, all sorts of problems in recent days. Just describe what life has been like for us first.
It's been a real challenge, Andrew. I mean, on the one hand, you have the blackouts, which really make life extremely difficult for ordinary Cubans. They've been rolling over the past 3 months since the US imposed a near total oil embargo on the island. But in fact, that embargo has been put in place on what was already the biggest energy and economic crisis the island has seen since the Cold War. So it was really sort of pouring petrol onto a fire, if you like, excusing the fuel analogy, but it really was already in a place of crisis. And then now there's this oil blockade. So you have the rolling blackouts. We saw recently that complete island-wide blackout, complete power cut from end to end of the island. That's the first time that's happened since the oil blockade was put in place. And of course, the blockade involves preventing other nations from sending oil to Cuba too. So Washington apparently has virtual complete control of Venezuela's oil supply, oil production, but it has also put pressure on other nations not to bail Cuba out. And we're seeing that manifest itself in the streets in a whole range of ways. Most noticeably, of course, is the pure lack of cars. There's just very, very few petrol cars circulating on the road. People are conserving what little fuel they have, either for their generators or for the most important trips that they need to take. Otherwise, people are on bikes, they're walking, some have electric vehicles they're using, but the city feels very, very switched off, very shut down by and large.
How sustainable is the life that you're describing now? How long could that go on for?
Well, the one thing that can never be said of the Cuban Revolution is that it lacks resistance and resilience, and the Cuban people have incredible resilience in the face of hardship. So there is a sort of willingness by the Cuban authorities to continue to sort of push back, to show defiance in the face of Washington's pressure. But of course, people are exhausted. As I say, it's not just the 3 months that have been the critical period with the full oil blockade, but already people were tired with constant blackouts, because it means, obviously, that when the power comes on, if it's 2 in the morning, then people are getting up at 2 in the morning and cooking, because they simply don't know when they might have power back into their homes, and therefore for electric cookers and so on, when they might be able to prepare food. So there is sort of a sense in which many families are merely in survival mode. They're not living, as a retired nurse put it to me recently, they're surviving. And that is extraordinarily taxing on society as a whole, of course. Whether or not it can carry on in a sustained way, it's really very, very difficult. One wonders whether or not there'll be any sort of breakthrough on the apparent talks that are taking place between the Trump administration and the Cuban government, or if, as we're seeing, a Russian tanker with 730,000 barrels of oil actually makes it to the island past this blockade and provides a little bit of respite, although it's nowhere near enough to sort of, the dimensions of the crisis that Cuba is facing.
I'll come back to President Trump in a moment. There is an aid convoy en route to Cuba. That can't be enough to make a serious difference, though, can it?
You're right, it's an absolute drop in the ocean of Cuba's need. I think what it's intended to do, where it will be welcomed by the Cubans who see the coverage on it on state television and so on, will be the show of solidarity from the sort of international solidarity movement, supporters of Cuba from the UK, from the United States, travelling from Mexico and travelling from the US with this aid. But you're right, it doesn't even scratch the surface of the extent of the need on the island.
We heard on the Global News podcast a couple of days ago President Trump saying he could take Cuba and do anything he wants with it. What does he want?
Well, it's incendiary language at the very least, isn't it, to say this when your administration is having talks with the Cuban government. They can't be seen to simply hand over the keys of Cuba to Washington. This is 70 years almost of resistance, 70 years of building a revolution that's predicated in large part on defiance to Washington. So the idea that it would simply buckle at this stage and do as it were, and allow the US president, the sitting US president, to do, quote, whatever he wants with the island, isn't really going to work at this side of the equation. Now, of course, President Trump is known for his bombastic language. He's known for taking an extreme position that could be arguably a tactic for his team to then negotiate, from that point on. And that may be what's at play here. But certainly it's not going to go down well with the Cuban authorities. And in terms of what he wants when he says, I can do whatever I want with the island, I think in the very simple terms is that if he doesn't want regime change, he wants a changed regime. And what I mean by that is if we look at the Venezuelan example, having removed Nicolas Maduro from power, President Trump seems...
The Cheddar Rancher is here, stacked with grilled chicken breast, crispy bacon, and buttermilk ranch, only at Firehouse Subs.
I fly KLM. I really love their world business class. It's comfortable, spacious, and I got one of those Delft blue houses. Very much worth it.
Why should I pay here? Because everything is taxed.
Remember college? Well, now college is over, and here comes your student loan debt. Is private student loan debt wrecking your life? You need to talk to Y-Refi. Don't let private student loan debt ruin your life. Call Y-Refi today.
To work with Delcy Rodriguez, Nicolas Maduro's former vice president. The relationship seems to be working, he's getting what he wants out of it, and I think he would be looking for some form of, as it were, Cuban Delcy with whom he could work here in Havana. It's not clear who that person would be, and for that person to not have either the surname Castro or associations with the Castro family would be very, very difficult, particularly if, for Secretary of State Marco Rubio, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he's talking about sort of wholesale change at the top of the Cuban leadership and full kind of economic pivot in terms of the way this controlled economy works. Those are tall orders, and this is not a place that does wholesale and sweeping changes overnight. It tends to be very glacial drip feeding of changes over time. So in that sense, I feel like the two ideas really are at loggerheads.
Do you have any sense of what people in Cuba want to happen? Of course, it might be a spectrum of opinion, but what do people say about this kind of thing, apart from they'd like not to have to get up at 2 in the morning to cook their dinner?
It is a spectrum of opinion, but that is really the bottom line, is the vast majority of people, wherever they fall on the political spectrum in this nation, just simply want things to get better. They're exhausted, Andrew. They just really want things to get back to some degree of normalcy, where they can take their cars to the petrol pumps and fill them up at a price that's meaningful to them, not at a price that is completely out of their purchasing power. Pensions are really just a token sum, really. They're nominal. They barely buy people a carton of eggs each month. So that's difficult after a year, after years and years of dedication to the cause, as it were, doing what was asked of you. You've been a teacher, you've been a doctor, you've done what's been asked of you, you've been a good citizen, and at the end of your life, you're essentially left with virtually no safety net. The healthcare is in dire straits, and education is not what it once was. All of these things that have been the pillars of the Cuban Revolution are in deep trouble. A lot of the frustration is still being directed at the Cuban government rather than the Trump administration, despite what Donald Trump is doing in terms of this full fuel blockade.
And final thought about Russia. Cuba had an ally in Russia and the former Soviet Union for a long time. Where is Russia now? I know there's an oil tanker heading for Cuba under a Russian flag, but what else is going on with that relationship?
It's a difficult one in a sense for Russia to decide what to do here. It's a calculation for Putin and for Russia whether or not it actually wants to step up and support, yes, an old partner, but not one that necessarily provides the same relationship that it did in the Cold War. This isn't the Cuban Missile Crisis. This isn't, days after the Bay of Pigs. This isn't the USSR and Fidel Castro. This is a very different moment. So, given that Moscow has its own concerns in terms of its war on Ukraine, then it may simply make the calculation that beyond promises of sort of political backing, beyond this oil tanker, which may or may not make it, there is not much more that they're prepared to do just 90 miles off the coast of the US. It could, of course, go the other way in the coming years, the coming weeks and months, and they decide to back Havana more strongly, and that is the position that's taken. But I think most people look at the wording so far, look at the kind of actions that have been taken in the wake of the removal of Nicolas Maduro from power in Venezuela, the knock-on effects in Cuba, and think, well, actually, this isn't something that Russia is going to necessarily step into the breach of and support Havana to the hilt.
Thanks, Will. That was Will Grant, our correspondent in Havana. For more from the Global News Podcast, click the link below. And from me, Andrew Peach, thanks for being with us.
A compassionate guy who can stand up when he needs to stand up.
Well, I've been all over the world, it's about every country in the world, and I have to say the Russian women are probably the most beautiful women I've ever seen anywhere in the world. So many of them,
You know they said this man died?
The high-quality industrial products you need. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
That sickness is not going to see his face.
Unlimited play for just $1 a day.
First of all, I just want to say, I'm alive.
How do you prove you're not dead? That's the problem facing Benjamin Netanyahu this week.
Let's play Where is Bibi?
The A videos of Benjamin Netanyahu are not stopping.
I really think he might be actually GG, bro.
You might have heard the fake rumours that the Israeli Prime Minister had been killed. There were these photos of him, he was supposed to be killed in an airstrike, and they went all around the world, millions of views.
The thing is, they were generated by AI. But to give you a sense of how far this fake story spread, in the last week, the Israeli Prime Minister has posted multiple videos saying,
No, I cannot.
I'm Tristan Redmond in London.
and I'm Asma Khalid in Washington, D.C. And welcome to the Global Story on YouTube.
Because you don't want us to separate.
Coming up later, we'll be hearing from Peter Pomerantsev, who's written extensively on the questions of propaganda and disinformation, including the brilliant book, Nothing is True, Everything is Possible.
It's really just an augmentation of what we've seen on social media, what we've seen historically. People with AI, people doing that with rumours. It really is war propaganda.
But first, we'll hear from one of our colleagues who specializes in all of this.
My name is Thomas Copeland, I work for BBC Verify, and I spend my days trying to debunk AI-generated fake footage on your social media feed, trying to tell you what's real and what's not real. And that's a job that's becoming harder and harder to do.
Well, just the man we wanted to talk to you today.
Yeah, Thomas, we are here to do something which we don't
Every time you will come
just to
in,
talk
begging
about a
and
rumour. Where did we all first hear this rumour that Benjamin Netanyahu
was
So
dead.
that I'm working on.
I can tell you exactly. I was sitting on my bed at home taking a look at a TikTok that we had put out from BBC Verify earlier on today about another AI story. And as sometimes you will do when you're in a TikTok, you'll take a look at the comments, and the comments were all saying, you need to look into the 6 fingers. What about the 6 fingers? Look at the 6 fingers. And I thought to myself, oh gosh, maybe I've been on the tube, I've missed some of the fast-moving developments in the online world. And so on my TikTok, I went up to the top corner and searched up 6 fingers, and I saw reams of videos that were making claims that a press conference that the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had done on the Thursday. These claims said, this is AI, this is an AI version of Netanyahu. How do we know? They said, well, he's got 6 fingers, was the claim in some of the videos. I quickly looked into it. In reality, of course, he didn't have 6 fingers. The HD version of this press conference showed there was an ever so slight shadow on his 5th finger at one moment, one frame within this quite long press conference. But this fell into a long run of false and AI-generated pictures that we had seen since the beginning of the war, claiming to show Benjamin Netanyahu injured or killed, apparently in an Iranian airstrike. And such the volume of these claims that on Sunday, that day, so just a couple of days ago, the Israeli PM decided that he needed to say something for himself. He went to a coffee shop in Jerusalem and filmed a kind of proof of life video in which he said, I am alive, I'm here in this coffee shop, look at my fingers. And he held up his fingers. I only have 5 of them. But then what happens obviously after that, you go through the comments on that video. We did a TikTok on that video, and people are saying this video is AI generated, and on it goes. And since then, Netanyahu has published more proof of life videos. On Tuesday of this week, conversation in a video showing him standing next to US Ambassador Mike Huckabee walking down a corridor. Another proof of life video.
So none of them quite did the
None of that quite is the naysayers, and the reason for that is because we have seen this AI-generated wave of content this conflict and that has left a lot of people, even in the 2 or 3 weeks that this conflict has been going on for, unsure of what they can believe when they look at the pictures and images on the screens in front of them.
Well, you in fact, Thomas at Verify, you all did a video to correct the story here. What feedback did you all get?
So tell her.
Well, what we did was we debunked the various AI-generated pictures and images. We debunked this 6-finger claim by showing the HD footage that clearly showed that he didn't have a 6th finger. We showed the proof of life video in the coffee shop. We had multiple angles that were shared on social media by that coffee shop. But of course, the comments then are filled again with folks saying that this is sort of AI-generated content. And you're left as a reporter in this slightly difficult position because you're saying to yourself,